How's it going, everybody? I'm the Conservative Nerd, and the video I'd like to do today is called Axel Alonso Needs to Grow a Pair, or the history of Editor-in-Chief at Marvel Comics. And in order to explain why I think Axel Alonso needs to grow a pair, I kind of have to go over the Editor-in-Chiefs at Marvel and show how it used to be to how it is today. And here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to start off in 45 when Stan Lee took over. I'm not going to go before that. It's way too far. So from 45 to 72, which is a long time, Stan Lee was editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. And a lot of people see him as a good old boy, and he was. He was real nice to people, but especially fans. But at work, Stan Lee expected stuff to get done. Stan Lee expected a certain kind of quality. And there was a whole thing about how, like, some people were scared of him. J. Jonah Jameson became Stan Lee later on into comics just because that's how hardcore Stan was. He used to joke with writers that he was going to put up, because he was known for hyperbole, he was going to put on covers, "This is a big pile of flamey crap." And writers, and he actually did a couple times, he would put on the cover, "This isn't one of our best," just to kind of tell the writers, you know, you got to do a better job. And that's the type of guy he was. But after Stan left, they went through 5 different editor-in-chiefs in a 7-year span. And from everything I hear, it was a mess. It was a hard job, and you had to be tough. And a lot of these guys, like Lin Wayne and Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway, Marv Wolfman, Archie Goodman, these are all people, if you've read any Silver Age comics, you know who these guys are. These are top creators. Jerry Conway has said, like, this was a mess. You had to fire friends, or friends would quit on you, or people would hate you. You had to yell at people. He knew there was a writer on a book and it wasn't selling. He tried to fire him and he couldn't because the production staff threatened to quit. And he was like, why does the production staff care? And it turned out they were in the same coven together. I mean, you got to deal with some weird people. And it's a tough job. And nobody could handle it. Everybody was quitting. And then came the Shooter. Jim Shooter came in 78 and he changed it. He made the books run. He made them on time. He kept artists. He wouldn't let people mess with characters. If people want to do something stupid, he was like, no, this is a franchise. I have to protect these people. And they called him a fascist. And it was Shooter is God was the phrase around Marvel. At the company picnics, they burnt Jim Shooter in effigy. But Jim Shooter may have been hated, but Jim Shooter had grapefruits. Jim Shooter made sure that company ran well. And some of the best stuff came out of that era. Uncanny X-Men. That's when all the people like Wolverine and Storm. This was Shooter. This was Shooter. Had a good eye for talent and knew what was good stories. Chris Claremont says, like, when he went in to tell Shooter he was going to kill Jean Grey, he thought for sure he was going to say no. And he said, I'm going to kill Jean Grey. And Shooter looked at him and said, kill her. Because Shooter knew good stories. Shooter knew what was good. He brought Frank Miller onto Daredevil and let him do what he wanted because he knew. He knew it was good. Roger Stern's Avengers. He did the Superman versus Spider-Man. He put a lot of work into getting that done. And Jim Shooter wrote Secret War. Mattel created it, and a bunch of kids in a mall were the test audience and said they liked the words secret and war. So that's why it's called Secret Wars. But this was Jim Shooter's baby. And I want to say that Jim Shooter did not create the black suit or the symbiote. It was a kid named Randy Schuler who wrote it in to Marvel, and Marvel gave him $220 for creating Venom. So it was Randy Schuler who got that. $220 for creating a character that's coming out in a movie next year. Good job, Randy Schuler. Shooter got fired because all the writers and artists got together and said, hey, we don't like this guy, we want him gone. And maybe Shooter was a little too tough. Maybe he had just too big of grapefruits. I don't know. But he kept the company running well. He is responsible for Secret Wars 2, which is terrible. But Shooter had balls. Tom DeFalco came next in 87 and 94. And Tom DeFalco did an okay job. He had a tough time. He said, you know, a lot of people said he was nicer than Shooter. But even Tom DeFalco said he had to yell and scream at his friends. He yelled more in that job than he's ever yelled in his life. He said it was the toughest job he's ever had. And I imagine it is. Bob Harras came on. No, wait. Before Bob Harras, from '94 to '95, Marvel had 5 editors, and it was a mess, and they got rid of it quickly. Bob Harras was in charge of the mutant division, and he got moved up because that division was doing very well. Bob Harras only lasted till 2000, and Bob Harras had a rough time. He was another guy like Shooter who's not very well liked, but Bob Harras had a rough time because that was in the time where they were about to go bankrupt from printing too many variant covers and too many comics, and they were about to go bust. Harris came in, he tightened the reins up a little bit. He lost a lot of the talent over to Image. It was a tough time. And Bob Harras was gone in 2000. I think a lot of the stuff with Bob Harras was he was getting a lot of old school writers that probably weren't good for the time period. Quizzoda came in next, and from 2000 to 2011. And I think Quizzoda did an okay job. A lot of people blame him from SJW. I think that doesn't fall on Quizzoda. He did do One More Day, which was a bad idea. But other than that, I mean, he did a lot of cool stuff. I mean, he had Grant Morrison and Mark Miller and a lot of top writers that would bring in. And I don't think he could have been mean with the type of talent he's using. Now, today, with Axel Alonso, I think Axel definitely has to be a shooter. I don't think they're using the talent that Quizzoda was using. I think they have a lot of talent that's never even worked in comics before, and they definitely need editing. They need to be harder on these people. Their characters are all over the map. Nobody's protecting these characters. Jim Shooter said that his job was to protect those characters. Axel Alonso, I don't think feels that way, that he cares if he protects these characters. And I really don't think Axel Alonso's ever screaming at G. Willow Wilson, or I guarantee he's never yelled at Ta-Nehisi Coates and said, hey, this script is boring. Which, these are things he needs to do. You think Jim Shooter would have let that get away? No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't let him get away with anything. So that's kind of my point, is I think Axel needs to grow a pair. I think they need to maybe bring Shooter back. He still looks pretty good. I think you could do it. Give him a couple of years just to clean up the company, and then you can bring somebody else in. But, hey, Marvel, Shooter, bring him back. And that's my opinion. Thank you guys for watching.